subjects or sciences in Islam. One is known as usul al-fiqh and the other is known as fiqh. Usul al-fiqh is the theory where a mujtahid comes up with a system that he is going to use for deriving the Islamic laws. This is where they deal with the sources that they are going to use. And then fiqh is the actual subject or the science where they practice that. And when we look at this issue, we also looked at the sources of Sharia and we defined them to be dalil al-shar'i, legal proof, and dalil al-aqli. We haven't yet reached into the details of it, but on the dalil al-shar'i, legal proof for the Sharia laws, there are two methods. One is oral and one is non-oral source. In the oral source we have the Quran and the Hadith. In the non-oral source we have Ma'soom's actions and Ma'soom's silent approval, known as Taqreed. If you remember, we also said that although we classify it as non-oral, but that has reached to us in written form. So again, we are dealing with Hadith reports. Tonight I would like to concentrate on only one, the Quran, as a source of deriving Islamic laws, because this is an issue which was highly debated about a century ago, a little bit more, and these days it's coming up again in form of what is known as akhbari usuli conflict. And Quran becomes the point of the contention or difference between these two methods used by the scholars of the Shia Isna Ashari faith. First of all, let me say that although when we use the terms usuli and akhbari, it doesn't mean that there are two different subsects within Shia faith. They are both Shia Isna Ashari individuals, and the difference is in the methodology of deriving the Sharia laws. And this is how, normally the way it's put. Unfortunately, we don't have the big screens there, but if you can just look at the monitors that we have. From the usuli point of view, normally you get these four names: Quran, Hadith, Ijma, and Aql. From the akhbari point of view, you get a question mark on Quran, yes on Hadith, absolutely no on Ijma and Aql. However, this issue of Ijma and Aql, the reason I have put in a shaded color, because even from the usuli point of view, those are not really sources per se by themselves for the Sharia laws. If you remember, we mentioned last week that Ijma basically is only acceptable by the mujtahideen if it is a window into the sunnah of the Ma'soom. If it does not, bring us to that level, then that ijma has no value at all. According to Sheikh Murtaza Ansari, one of the most prominent scholar of usul al-fiqh, whose book, Rasail, is still one of the very high-level texts used in Hausa. He says that the origin of ijma is from Ahl Sunnah, and the origin of Ahl Sunnah is ijma. And he is a topmost, usuli scholar of the last century. And so for us, ijma is very different from the way it is used by the Sunni scholars. For us, it is the consensus of the scholars of the early days, which indicates that there must have been a hadith which has not reached to us. So ijma for us, again, goes back to hadith. And aql is not really an independent source as such. Aql is actually the tool to study the Quran and hadith. So we are actually left with two primary sources of Sharia laws, whether you are akhbari or usuli, and that is Quran and hadith. And of course, even when we approach the Quran and Hadith, there is difference in how we approach it from the usuli and akhbari perspective. And that's what we are going to look at it tonight, only from the Quranic perspective. Number one, let me just set down the difference, the opinions of both sides. The usuli Shia scholars, they say that the Quran is hujjat. Hujjat means it's a binding authority. If it says something, you are responsible towards it in the eyes of Allah on the day of Quran. And its apparent meaning, the zahir meaning of the ayat of Quran are valid to derive the Islamic laws. Of course, it doesn't mean that the usuli scholars are saying you don't have to look at the hadith of the Ma'sumin. Absolutely not. But they are saying that the ayat of Quran, the zahiri meaning of the ayat of Quran are hujjat. Allah will hold us accountable if we violate the zahiri meaning of the ayat of Quran. Of course, we don't just look at it, we also look at the hadith of the Imams about those ayat, the context of the ayat, whether there is nasikh, mansukh, am, khas, there's a lot of many different things the mujtahideen look into before they conclude an opinion about the ayat of Quran. The akhbari ulama, on the other hand, they say that Quran is not hujjat. The zahiri meaning of the ayat of Quran does not have this binding authority upon us unless and until there is a hadith from the Ma'soom explaining that ayat. So you see the difference there. The difference is that the akhbari ulama is saying that you cannot just use the Quran unless there is a hadith from the Ma'soom about that particular ayat. If there is no hadith from the Ma'soom explaining that ayat, it doesn't have that binding authority on you. It's not hujjat. This is basically where we look at the main difference between the two schools of thought, or the two methods of ijtihad, if I may call it. Now, one of the arguments used by the akhbari scholars is this statement, that the Quran can only be understood by Ahlul Bayt. And so if there is no hadith from the Ahlul Bayt alayhimu salatu wasalam, then you cannot use the Quran to derive laws from it. And when we look at this, let me start with this statement. It's obviously wrong to believe that every single ayat is beyond the understanding of the common person, since the Quran has been addressed to the people in general. So to say that, all ayat of Quran is beyond the level of understanding and fahm of common people is obviously a wrong statement. Why? If you look at the ayat of Quran, there are 20 times, and these are mostly all ayat we were revealed in Makkah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to the mushrikeen. Ya ayyuhan nas. If He is talking to them, then He is talking in the language and the style which is easily understandable by them. Otherwise, that message has no meaning at all. The whole purpose of Risalat is then null and void. 2 times, Allah even addresses those who are Ya ayyuhalladhina kafaru. So many times we have this statement, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the Yahud. And many, many times, almost 100 times, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the mu'mineen, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. You cannot expect that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to the mu'mineen in general, and He says, but this is not for you, you don't understand it. So this is something we have to keep in mind, that at least majority of the ayat of Quran should be understandable to the common people in society. Otherwise, the whole purpose of coming down of the Quran is defeated. Now, when we hear about this issue that, we are told, okay, no, this is only for the Ahlul Bayt to be understood. People don't have the ability. We'll come to the ahadith. But look at the ayat of Quran. What I gave the list was just a very general thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala urges the people to ponder and reflect on the ayat of Quran. At least we have 3 or 4 of them. أفلا يتدبرون القرآن ولو كان من عند غير الله لوجدوا فيه اختلافا كثيرا. Do not the people ponder upon the Quran? If this was a book from other than Allah, they would have found many differences, contradictions within it. But this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what is the word? يتدبروا. Tadabbur. To reflect and to try to ponder and understand. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically Himself urging the people to ponder and reflect on the ayat of Quran. Number 1. Another ayat. أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. Do not they, reflect and ponder on the Quran, or what has happened? Are there locks on their hearts that they are not thinking about it? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is urging the people to ponder on the Quran. كِتَابٌ أَنزَلْنَاهُ إِلَيْكَ مُبَارَكٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addressing the Prophet, He says, we have sent down upon you a book which is Mubarak, which is blessed. لِيَدَّبَّرُوا آيَاتِهِ. So that people may reflect on its ayat. وَلِيَتَذَكَّرُ أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ. And so that the people who have aql and understanding, they may reflect and remember the reality. Number 2, the Quran itself says it was revealed in clear Arabic. That was the immediate audience of the Quran. وَإِنَّهُ لَتَنزِيلُ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Verily this is the revelation which was sent down gradually from the Lord of the universe. نَزَلَ بِهِ الرُّوحُ الْأَمِينَ. The trustworthy angel came down with it. عَلَى قَلْبِكَ. It came down on the heart of you, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. لِتَكُونَ مِنَ الْمُنْزِرِينَ. So that you may be among those who warn people against the azab of akhirah. بِلِسَانٍ عَرَبِيٍّ مُبِينٍ. It came down in the clear Arabic language. So what was the purpose of having that clear Arabic language? If it was not so that people may think and understand and follow it. Number 3. 9 times, and especially this is interesting because I looked at all these ayat carefully before I put them together. 9 times Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after describing ayat dealing with Sharia laws only. This has nothing to do about other issues of mutashabihat. Sharia laws. 9 times after describing various Sharia laws, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ آيَاتِهِ لِلنَّاسِ. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clarifies, bayan, clarifies His verses, linnas, for the people. So the ayat dealing with fiqh, with sharia, are bayyid. They are clearly sent so that people may understand it. For example, dealing with the issue of fasting. That's where it comes. When Allah talks about intoxicants and gambling, these words come. كَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ آيَاتِهِ لِلنَّاسِ. When He's talking about divorce and related issues. When He's talking about charity, again these words come. When He talks about unity and brotherhood. When He talks about making a qasam or an oath and not fulfilling it, but violating it, there is a kafara there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about it. And then knocking before entering parents' room. There are certain times of the day when Allah says, don't just enter into the in the room of your parents. They also need time for privacy. And at those times, before you go in, knock. So these are practical laws that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sending down. And in all those cases, He's saying, كَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ آيَاتِهِ لِلنَّاسِ. And finally, the houses where He has allowed us to go for eating without any formality or seeking permission. There also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses this phrase, كَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ آيَاتِهِ لِلنَّاسِ. Number 4. Okay, so this is as far as the issue of understanding of the Quran is concerned. It came down as a guidance for the people in general. It is not only for the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt, and the rest of the humanity has been told, no, suspend it. Only when there is a hadith about it, then reflect on it. Otherwise, you're not allowed to do that. There is nothing in the Quran which gives that indication. We'll come to mutashabihat at the end. This is just the beginning of the discussion. Second point, where we're on this context of whether Quran can be used as a source of deriving laws or not, is the issue is that haven't the Imams forbidden the tafsir of the Quran? Who gives the right to the mujtahideen to do the tafsir of the Quran and to come up with the fatawa based on the ayat of Quran? And this is where the issue of understanding hadith is very important. It's not just, you look at the translation of the hadith, oh, this is what it means. And so this should be the fatwa. Otherwise, every Arab by birth will be a mujtahid. It doesn't work that way. Even these Arabs, those who become mujtahideen, they have to go through the process of learning. So it's not just the language. It's just like me saying, I know the English language, so I'll go and, open any medical text, of a very advanced level and start reading it. It doesn't work that way. Look at the hadith where we have, and this is just one famous one that I'm using, from the Ma'soom alayhi salam, where they say, من فسر القرآن برأيه فقد افترى على الله الكذب. And there are many hadiths of this theme. Whoever interprets the Quran according to his own views, he has prescribed a lie to Allah. The conclusion that he is deriving is actually saying, oh, Allah said this, whereas it's not Allah's statement. Now, when you look at this, first of all, you have to realize this hadith and similar hadiths are not necessarily saying that you are not allowed to ponder and reflect on the ayat of Quran, or the zahiri meaning is to be suspended. No. Basically, especially after the required research has been done, what it is saying is basically what is known as tafsir bil-ra'i, which is haram, definitely haram. Anybody who does tafsir bil-ra'i, he is actually preparing his seat in Jahannam. What does tafsir bil-ra'i mean? Tafsir bil-ra'i means taking the zahiri meaning, or a meaning which might have two different, dimensions of it, and then based on a personal choice, one says, okay, I think this is what it is. And it happens. There's a fellow who lived in 80s in US, probably had problem with lard becoming haram. So he looked at the ayat of Quran and he says, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, حُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمْ, haram for you is this, لَحْمُ الْخِنْزِيرِ, the flesh of swine. Who says the charbi of swine? This is where the problem comes up. Whereas you have to look at the sunnah, of course. And you have to look at even the word lahm, how it has been used in the Quran. This is not a butcher's manual saying that you buy ground beef regular or with charbi or without charbi. This is not a qassab's book. This is actually book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, yes, if anyone has preconceived preferences and then uses the Quran That is what is known as, tafsir bil-ra'i. The third point here is tafsir bil-ra'i could also mean that doing the zahiri, taking the zahiri meaning without considering rational arguments, or without researching other relevant verses and the ahadith which convey a different meaning. Somebody says, well, yeah, it says, Yadullah fawqa aydihim. The zahiri meaning is Allah's hand is over the hands of the people. And so he doesn't look at other ayat, doesn't look at even ahadith, just says, okay, so I'll just take this, and basically, Allah has a hand. He's not looking at another ayat which says, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There is nothing like him. You have to look at that ayat also. Then you have to put together and then you say, okay, then it doesn't mean hand the way I understand it. Then I have to take it from zahir to the majazi and metaphorical meaning. And so the issue is, tafsir bil-ra'i means somebody just goes there without looking at the context, without looking at even the rational arguments if they are relevant to, let's say, theology. Or when we talk about other relevant verses or ahadith, and then comes up with an opinion. That's tafsir bil-ra'i, and that is what is forbidden. And the fourth point, which is very important, the akhbari understanding of this and similar ahadith go completely against many other ahadith where the imams have asked us to look at the Quran, ponder on the Quran, reflect on the Quran, look at the zahir of the Quran and consider that to be the measure for accepting or rejecting hadith. If we have problem in hadith, what do we do? And I'll give you just one example here, and there are many, many examples of this kind. A very prominent companion, Umar ibn Hanzala, a companion of the fifth Imam, he basically, it's a long hadith, where he's talking about the situations, how do we handle judgment by the people who are from outside, other madhab. And Imam said, you can't do this. Imam says, go and look for those who know our views. And then he zeroes down different situations. And finally he says, suppose we have two individuals from among our own scholars. Both of them are quoting your hadith on the same issue, but both of them are contradictory. One is saying one thing, the other is saying, and both are basing their judgment on hadith from you. Then Imam says, look at them who is more a'dal and atqa, more religious and pious. Or you see which one is accepted by the majority of the community, go with that and reject those which are of isolated kinds of reports. But then he says, فَإِنْ كَانَ الْخَبَرَانِ عَنْكُمَا مَشْهُورَيْنِ قَدْ رَوَاهُمَا الثِّقَاتُ عَنْكُمْ. What if both hadiths from you are famous, equally famous, and reliable people have narrated them from you? All the narrators are reliable. But the conclusion and the message of those two hadiths are contradictory. What do we do then? And that's where Imam responds by saying, and this is not only fifth Imam's judgment, this is from the Prophet and other Ma'asumin also, where he says, see, then you use a measure. See which one is according to the Quran and the Sunnah, which is already established before, and against the Amma, Al-Amma and Al-Khassa. These are two words used in the language of the Imams. Al-Khassa means the Shia, Al-Amma means the Sunni. And so if you see contradictory ahadith, the way you would test is you will see, is it according to the Quran or not? Is it according to other confirmed ahadith or not? And is it against and opposite the Sunni view of that time? Then accept that. That is the criteria of how you know what is right, what is wrong. And discard the one وَيُتْرَكُ مَا خَالَفَ حُكْمُهُ حُكْمَ الْكِتَابِ وَالْسُنَّةِ وَوَافَقَ الْعَامَّةِ. And discard the one which is opposed to the Quran and the Sunnah and is according to the view of the Amma, the Sunni prevailing view at that time. And that is why our ulama also study the Sunni fiqh. Not only of the present day, they have to study the Sunni opinion of the days of Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salam and Imam Jaffar al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Because when we look at the ahadith from them and then they say, okay, we have two contradictory one, in order to accept one and reject other, if there is nothing in Quran about it, one method is to see what is the prevailing Sunni view. The one which is according to that, you discard it, and the one which is opposed to it, you accept it. And so here we see that Quran is being mentioned as a measure of accepting or rejecting hadith. And this is something important to keep in mind, that it is not the hadith which is the measure for the Quran. It is the Quran which is the measure for the hadith, whether you accept it or reject it. Our Imams themselves have taught prominent companions how to look at the Zahiri, and this is the project we have today. We'll do it all this together. The Zahiri meaning of the ayat of Quran, and you derive the laws from it. And there's a very interesting case, something which is easy for us to understand. That's why I've given you those, that's actually not a quiz. It's more a worksheet for us. And those who are following us online, because I got to complain that when I give the quiz, they don't see it, they don't know. We have that. If you follow on the screen, you will be able to follow us. Zurara bin A'yun, a very prominent Sahabi of the 5th and the 6th Imam. If I'm right as far as my memory goes, the 6th Imam actually praised Zurara, that he's one of those. If it hadn't been for him, the ahadith of my fathers would have been lost. So he's a very, top level Sahabi of the 5th Imam. He says to the Imam, because we know there is a difference between how we do the wuzu, the Ahlul Bayt way and the Sahaba way. The Shia and the Sunni ways are different. In the Shia perspective, when it comes to masa, we only do the masa, wipe only a part of our head. Whereas the Sunnis basically wipe the entire head. And so he asked the Imam, and this is where we see that, this was the learning process. This is where the Imams were teaching the Sahaba how to do Ijtihad in a way. Although its scope was very limited at that time. When you have a Ma'asum, you don't need Ijtihad. But this is one example where people are being trained. Can you tell me from where? ألا تخبرني من أين علمت وقلت إن المس ببعض الرأس وبعض الرجلين. Can you tell me from where you came to know, and you say that masa is to be done only on a portion of the head and only a portion of the feet, not the entire head and not the entire feet. The hadith is very interesting, where فَضَحِكَ, Imam laughed at his question. ثم قال يا زرارة زرارة قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم ونزل به الكتاب من الله. Imam laughed and said, "Oh Zurara, our view is actually based on what the Prophet said and what Allah's book came down with it." Now this is interesting. He mentions the Prophet and the Quran, but then if you look at the hadith going further, he doesn't quote the hadith. He says the ayat of Quran, if you look at it carefully, is sufficient for you. And the way he explains is very interesting. You look at the ayat, you have the paper with you. This is from Surah number 5, ayat 6. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم وأيديكم إلى المرافق وامسحوا برؤوسكم وأرجلكم إلى الكعبين. The normal translation you will find is where it says, "O you who believe, when you stand up for prayers, then wash your faces and your hands till the elbows, and wipe your head and feet till the ankles." Now, let us go through this step by step, and we'll use the hadith of the Imam also there as a guidance of how he taught us to look at the zahir of the ayat and come to the conclusion. The first statement, "Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, idha qumtum ila salat." O you who believe, when you stand up for prayers. This is an ayat about wuzu, order of the wuzu. But the condition is there, idha. Idha qumtum ila salat. When you stand up for prayers. It means that wuzu is not wajib by itself. You always do wuzu for something else. So wudu is not wajib as an act by itself. Either it's for namaz or for touching the wordings of the Quran, or you want to do tawaf. So by itself wudu is not wajib. And here it is starting with that condition. إِذَا قُمْتُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ. So you're just looking at the zahir. That when you stand up for prayers, then you do the wuzu. What do you do? First order is فَقْسِلُوا. Wash. Ghasl. Not ghusl. Ghusl is the whole. Ghasl is just washing. فَقْسِلُوا. The first thing, وُجُوهَكُمْ. Wash your face. Then it says وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ. And your hands. Now, when you look at the words فَقْسِلُوا, we know in Arabic language, in lisan, in Arabiyyin mubin, this is in command form. Anyone who knows Arabic language, they know that فَقْسِلُوا, this is a command, wash. And so this is basically, it gives this sense of wujuh. Wash what? Wujuhakum. Wujuh is plural of wajh, face. And so do we wash half of the face, part of the face, or the entire face? It's clear from the zahir meaning here. Then it comes to وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ. And wash your hand. Yad. Remember last week we looked at this example. Now yad is used for the hand, the forearm, as well as the entire hand here. And that is why the question comes up, what do we wash? It has to be washed fully, not partially, like wujuh also has to be washed fully. But is it the arm or the forearm or only the hands? And therefore you have these words إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ as a limitation, that okay, it's only till here. But again, you have to do it fully. So this portion of this hand, forearm has to be washed completely. This is one thing that we see. Now the question that Zurara had was about the masa. The second order in this ayat, first was waqsilu. The second order was wamsahu, which is from mas, to wipe. And normally when we talk about in Arabic language, mas is done with, wiping is done with the hands. وَامْسَهُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ. Now, وَامْسَهُ is clear, like وَاغْسِلُوا وَامْسَهُوا. It is a command. But then, بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ. Imam says to Zurara, لأن الله عز وجل يقول فاغسلوا وجوهكم فعرفنا أن الوجه كله ينبغي أن يغسل. Allah says earlier, وَاغْسَلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ, that you have to wash your face, so we know that the entire face has to be washed. ثُمَّ قَالَ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ. Then he says, you wash your hands till the elbows. ثُمَّ فَصَّلَ بَيْنَ الْكَلَامِ فَقَالَ. Then he divided. Now وَاغْسِلُوا is finished. The second part of the ayat is coming. وَامْسِهُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ. Imam says, فَعَرَفْنَا حِينَ قَالَ بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ أَنَّ الْمَسْ بِبَعْضِ الرَّأْسِ لِمَكَانِ الْبَاءِ. The secret is the ba there. See, we put it in a different color there. Imam is saying, wamsahu, and wipe. If the ba was not there, then you had to wipe the entire head. But there is ba there. And what is that ba doing? It is not just there because it looks more beautiful if it was with ba or without ba. Just as we had wujuhakum, it could have been ru'usakum. But it is not. It has a ba. And ba in Arabic language is used for tab'iz, for partiality. And so wipe a part of your head. This is where Imam is saying, we understand that the masa of the head has to be done only a part of it, the front part of it, not the whole head, because of limakan al-ba. And then, because if it was without ba, if you see on the screen, it says it would have been ru'usakum. Even the sin would have a fatha, not a kasra. But the kasra is there because of the ba. The ba has come before it, so the last sign of that noun changes from kasra to fatha. And then the second statement, وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ, and you wipe your feet. Now here, according to the tafsir of Ahlul Bayt, and if you look at the language also, it's all together. Wipe part of your head and your feet. That ba is also connected to arjul. And so you don't have to wipe your entire feet, only one part of the feet. And of course, till where? And that's where, just like you had ilal marafiq in the hands, you have ilal ka'bayn, up to the ankles, as a definition of where the wiping of the hand will stop. Is it making sense? Or are we making it more difficult here? Let us look at it again. This is what we had seen. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم وأيديكم إلى المرافق وامسحوا برؤوسكم وأرجلكم إلى الكعبين. Now, there are two major differences between our wudu and the wudu done by the Sunnis, the school of the Sahaba. One is the wiping of the whole head, another is washing of the feet. If you see, even if you look at the way the wordings have come, one order is faqsilu, the second order is wamsahu. Allah has connected wuju and aidi with ghusl, and ru'us and arjul with wams. How do they then do the washing of the feet? They say, well, it all connected with the faqsilu. Why? Because arjula, lam has fatha, aidiya has fatha, wujuh has fatha, so it's all connected. And we say to them, if you look at Arabic language, especially the balaghat and fasahat when it's concerned, when you look at the eloquence of the Arabic language, even the ru'usakum would have been seen with fatha, but because of the ba, it has become ru'usikum. And the closer order to arjul is wamsahu, not faqsilu. Why you are going so far away? You go to the first order which has come in that sentence, closer to it, and that is wamsahu. And so this is where we see that, even looking at the zahir without other preconceived, ways of doing things, even the zahir and the wordings of the Quran brings us to the right way as taught to us by the Ahlul Bayt, alayhimu salatu wassalam. Salawatun akbar. The same ayat continues. Then if you become najis, and you don't have water, then you do tayammum. Even there you will see the same concept is coming in. And later on it says, when it talks about tayammum, it says, وَامْسَحُوا بِوُجُوهِكُمْ وَأَيْدِيِكُمْ مِنْهُ. Can you tell me that what is the difference between the wuju here and the wuju in the wuzu? Look at it carefully. What is the difference? There is a ba. In ghusl it says, فَقْسِلُوا in wuzu, فَقْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ. Wash your face, your entire face. Here is saying in tayammum, وَامْسَهُ بِوُجُوهِكُمْ. A portion of your face. So in tayammum you don't have to do wiping of the entire face. Again, because of that, as the Imam says, لِمَكَانِ الْبَا. The secret is in that zahiri letter known as ba there. وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ مِنْهُ, and a portion of your head. And this is where, Abdullah ibn Abbas, when he used to argue with these leaders of the Sahaba about wuzu, and they used to do this washing of the feet, he used to say, why don't you look at this ayat yourself? Allah talks about washing of the face and the hands, wiping of the head and the feet. When it comes to tayammum, He eliminates the process of masa. In wuzu, the masa is for head and feet. In tayammum, Allah has eliminated that. He said only you do wuju and aidi, the wiping of it. This is where it shows that arjul, the issue of feet, is connected with the issue of head. It has to be wiped and it doesn't have to be washed. And this is where you see a very clear indication that, Imam is giving us the example of how to look at even the zahir of the ayat of Quran. He doesn't go into the hadith of Rasulullah, although he said, Rasul told us, and the ayat of Quran has come to us about it. And he also tells Zurara, لِمَكَانِ الْبَا, because of this presence of ba in this ayat. And finally, this whole issue whether we can look at the Quran and derive laws or not, the question is, what is the basis of the two, between the Quran and the Hadith? Is this the Hadith Hujjat because of the Quran? Or is the Quran Hujjat because of the Hadith? This is where we have to, and the answer is very obvious. The Hadith of the Ma'soom becomes binding to us because of the ayat of Quran. It is Quran which says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولَ وَأُولِي الْأَمْرِ مِنْكُمْ. The obedience of Allah and Rasul and Ulul Amr, the A'imma, is there in the Quran. Because of that order of the Quran, the zahiri meaning of that, we are following the Hadith. So the Hadith is becoming Hujjat, a binding authority on us because of the Quran. You cannot say that we will not go to the Quran and seek guidance from it without the Hadith. Means if there is no Hadith, then even if the ayat is very clear, you are not allowed to even discuss that. No, that's not really the reality. So what do we do with this ayat of Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about mutashabihat? That ayat of Quran is of all kinds. This is the third part of our discussion. This is an ayat in Surah Al-Imran, ayat number 7. It's a long ayat, where he says, هُوَ الَّذِي أَنزَلَ عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابِ. He is the one who sent down to you the book. مِنْهُ آيَاتٌ مُحْكَمَاتٌ هُنَّ أُمُّ الْكِتَابِ. They are ayat of the Quran which are muhkamat, definitive and clear in meaning. And they form, they are the Ummul Kitab. They are the mother of the book. This is where motherhood becomes very important. This is the actual basis of understanding the Quran. وَأُخَرْ, and there are other ayat which are mutashabihat. Mutashabihat, allegorical, metaphorical. You can't take the zahiri meaning of it. And then Allah says, فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ زَيْغٌ, and those in whose heart is crookedness, فَيَتَّبِعُونَ مَا تَشَابَهَ مِنْهُ. They go after the metaphorical or allegorical ayat. Why do they go after it? ابتغاء الفتنة, to create, fitna among the people. confuse people. وَابْتَغَاءَ تَعْوِيلِهِ, and they seek to interpret those ayat mutashabihat, whereas they do not know. وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَعْوِيلُهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. And nobody knows the true ta'wil, meaning of the mutashabihat, except Allah and those who are firmly grounded in knowledge, which refers to the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam. And so, how then we relate this to this our discussion about fiqh and ijtihad and tafsir in general? Number one, a mujtahid in ijtihad deals with the verses of fiqh. These are commandments that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed. And by nature it has to be from the muhkamat, clear commandments. Otherwise this whole system of Sharia will collapse. Because the Sharia is based on this concept that the Mawla gives the order and the Abd has to implement the order. If the Mawla is not giving a clear order, how is the Abd going to, implement that? So the order from the Mawla has to be clear. A mujtahid deals with the ayat of fiqh, practical issues. We looked at 9 places in Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after talking about the ayat of the Sharia and fiqh, He says, وَكَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ آيَاتِهِ لِلنَّاسِ. And so the fiqh ayat have to be from non-mutashabihat. Number 2, the verses of mutashabihat mostly deal with metaphysical and aqidah issues. All these ayat where Allah talks about arsh of Allah. Literal meaning is throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Does it mean He has a throne where He sits? The way Sahih Bukhari says? And it's not even according to His size. He's overweight than that. Or when we talk about the kursi, or when we talk about yad for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or when we talk about wajh for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all these ayat of, metaphysical, i'tiqadat, especially dealing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these are the ayat which are known as mutashabihat. And there, to understand the meaning of those ayat, we have to go to other muhkam ayat of the Quran. Hunna ummul kitab. They are the basis of the book, and ar-rasikhuna fil ilm. And the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt, they are the one who will tell us. Yad doesn't mean hand, it means power. Wajhullah doesn't mean face of Allah, it means the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this is where we have to understand that this ayat mutashabihat, the ayat from Al-Imran, doesn't, say we are not allowed to ponder and do, tafsir of the Quran. The mutashabihat can only be understood by referring to the muhkamat and the guidance given by the ma'sumin. And finally, the mujtahideen, even when they deal with the ayat of Quran, it's not that they ignore the hadith. This is completely, absolutely false. Actually, according to one of the experts, he was saying, the usuli are the akhbari and the akhbari are the usuli. If you look at the method of ijtihad done by mujtahideen, 80% of their work deals with the hadith of the ma'sumin. 80%. And today I thought maybe, let me just randomly pick up 2 things from my library. One, I picked first volume of the discussion of Ayatollah Khoy on namaz. And, dealing with the wajib, the numbers of wajib namaz. And I looked at that section. Very clearly, he's talking about the ayat of Quran. For example, there is an ayat where we are told we have to maintain as-salatul wusta, the middle prayer. Now, which is that? It is Zuhr, is it Asr, is it Jummah? And that's where you will see he says, okay, there are ahadith about it from the Imams, many of them, and very clear of them. and authentic ones which says that Salatul Wusta is not Salatul Jummah, it is Salatul Zuhr. So it's not that the Mujtahideen, don't deal with the ahadith. No. Today we just, clearing some, the library and the papers that we had, I looked at a very old folder of my notes from Ayatollah Wahid Khurasani's Ijtihadi lectures, where I used to transcribe them. So I said, okay, let me look at this. And this is something I had written down from his lectures in 1980. And this is a discussion about ghina. I just looked at the first 2 pages. And right there, the very first issue, the ghina, singing, which is haram. The very first portion, what is the basis for the hurmat of ghina? It says, riwayat mufassira. Of course, these are all my wordings. And there I see, he had discussed 3 ayat from Quran, and all 3 ayat, they are ahadith dealing with that ayat. So it's not that the mujtahideen, just because the other group uses the term akhbari, it means the mujtahideen don't deal with akhbar and ahadith. No, this is, sometimes these days people just are being fed or make up things in order to basically weaken the system of Marjaiyyat that we have. And so what we see, in the discussion of tonight is the issue that Quran for us is one of the 2 primary source of laws. And in Ijtihad, the Mujtahid basically looks at the ayat, with all the requirement of research which has to be done, including the sayings of the Ma'asumeen, if they exist, about that relevant ayat. And so this is something, as far as the first source of law in Shia Ijtihad is concerned. We'll conclude here. If we have any 5 minutes. Any question? Yes. 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 This is where the balaghat and fasad comes in. The actual, let me just repeat the question so everybody can follow what we are saying. The question of the sister is about this ayat, wamsahu, about masa. We are saying ru'usi. Seen has kasra because of ba. And then wa arjulakum. And the arjul, the feet, are connected to that order. And so why is it not arjulikum? Now, in Arabic language, you normally go with the actual state of the sign, whether it is fatha at the end of the noun or not, or kasra or dhamma. And here also the reason why the sin has kasra and not fatha is because of be. Otherwise, in reality, it is a passive noun, and it has to be sa. Because of be, it's becoming si and not sa. So when it moves to the second clause, it goes back to the original state, and that is wa arjulakum. And this is very normal. Actually, it's considered to be the sign of the fasahat of Arabic language. And there are ayat of Quran dealing with that. For example, if you look at a statement, خَلَقَ اللَّهُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ. خَلَقَ is the verb. Allah is the doer. Samawat and arz are the object. So they should be fatha. Samawat comes first. But in Arabic language, samawat, the way it is, it doesn't ever come in fatha. So it ends with خَلَقَ اللَّهُ السَّمَاوَاتِ. But then after that, the second word, al-ard, reverts back to the original, wal-arda. Yes. And even the first one is an object. It should have been sa, but because of be, it has become si. Every other color I'm using, they're saying it doesn't show in the screen properly. That's why we end up with black. Inshallah. Pray that Allah may give me more time than we normally have. I actually sent it late afternoon to Brother Nanjiani, so he will forward the last ones tonight, inshallah. Yes. Well, they have done that, and but those signs in the Quran are not really, they are not wahi. These are all has been added later on to facilitate proper reading of the Quran, and there they have وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَعْوِيلُهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ. They stop, and then they say وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. You know, they say this and that. Even if you take it in that way, we still would say that this is all, meaning-wise, it's all connected. We still believe that, because you see, many years ago when we talked about Ulum al-Quran, we had this discussion about mutashabihat. If that ayat is saying nobody knows the meaning except Allah, nobody else, and Rasikhun are those who just say, oh, we don't know, we just believe what Allah says, then what is the point of having ayat mutashabihat? Allah is sending ayat to us, and He says nobody knows about it, nobody is allowed to know it. Well, where do we go then? But that's not mutashabihat. That's something else. There's another category by itself. No, it's mandatory by ilm tajweed, but that's not wahi for us. Yes. Yes, if you remember, we discussed it last Wednesday, the difference between the Shia and Sunni way of washing the hands, the forearm, basically is we do it from elbow to fingertips, and Sunnis do it from fingertips to the elbows. According to us, the Quran just tells us which part of the hand has to be washed. Now you start from here and go down here to the fingertips, or the other way around, you have to look at the Sunnah. That is where you go to the Prophet. And the Sunnah that we have from the Ahlul Bayt, going one generation to other, from 6th Imam, 5th Imam, all the way back to Rasulullah, is that you start washing from here. So Quran is only telling us what is the portion of the hand which has to be washed. Whether you start from here or here, that's where you have to go to the Sunnah. It's just like I bring a painter and I say, okay, I would like you to paint this wall yellow. From third pillar to here. He can start from there to the corner, or he can start from corner to there. So this ayat is only telling how much of the hand has to be washed. From where you have to go to the Sunnah of the Prophet. No, this is where we are saying that the ilal marafiq is just to say the washing has to be done till this portion of the hand, not till here, or not just till here, because the word yad applies to hand, forearm, as well as the entire arm here. And ilal marafiq is only there to define which part of the hand has to be, of the arm has to be washed. No, doesn't show the direction. Yes. Yes. Not just the meaning and the context, and with the other relevant ayat, everything means you have to do your proper research on it, yes. No, I'm not saying that. No. It's good if that's, you understand, it's good that I get the opportunity to clarify it. Absolutely, that's not the usuli perspective. The akhbari perspective is that if an ayat doesn't have a hadith from the ma'soom, you're not allowed to even discuss that. Okay? You suspend that ayat. It is suspended until the imam comes. The usuli perspective is that no, if it is zahiri meaning, you take it. It doesn't mean that if there are hadith about those ayat, you ignore it. Absolutely not. Huh? If there are no ahadith and the ayat is clear, yes. كَذَلِكَ اللَّهُ يُبَيِّنُ آيَاتِهِ لِلنَّاسِ. Yes. The only difference here is that Akhbari says, if there is an ayat of Quran where there is no hadith about it, you're not allowed to, do Ijtihad on it. Yes. Yes, definitely. You can't take just an ayat, otherwise that's where tafsir bil Rai comes in. Yes. Okay, inshallah. So we'll deal with the second source, and that is hadith, inshallah, next week. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.